thing. Unmute. There we go. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming back tonight to the Pig's Day. Tonight we have been joined by John from Apocolplypse Here. And in the sort of the spirit of the Pig's Day, trying to get everyone, he's one of those evil Christians. We've invited an evil Christian on tonight. So we're going to poke and prod. We're going to have some questions. We're going to find out a wee bit more about John. And, oh, I should get rid of that. Find out a wee bit of information from the other side. And see what John is, who John is and what John believes. And yeah, we'll go down that route. So, John, your description or your link is in the description. But other than that, if you want to just let people know who you are, where they can find you, and what you're about.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah. So I run a channel with my wife, Laura, called Apocolplypse Here. We've been doing it since last, I think August or September. So we're putting out content on there, and interviews. So we tend to interview biblical scholars, theologians, some philosophers, and then put out kind of short videos reviewing different works in theology, biblical studies, philosophy, all that sort of stuff. And it's been super fun. It's it's been a good time, and it's been great meeting people such as yourself, kind of through that and through the YouTube world and through Twitter and all of that. So yeah, and a little bit more kind of about me. I currently work as the director of faith formation at a church in Cary, North Carolina, which will be coming to an end very soon because my wife and I are moving. So I will be unemployed for a little bit. Yeah. And we'll be hopefully doing some teaching at the college that she just got hired at near Roanoke, Virginia, in the meantime. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Right, one thing, a question that me and Dave were having the other day, and I'll jump straight in with this, you know, as I'm sure Spartan's warned you. I'm not an asshole, I just sound like one. But one thing one thing that we were discussing the other day is when it comes to internet Christians, you know, I find that as a community, you know, and I'm going to use umbrella terms here, you know, we're going to say atheists, there's some agnostics and things like that. We're not going to get into fights or anything like that. We're just going to break it up down the middle and say Christian and atheist. But I find with, like, I come onto the internet for my reasons, did the channel and all the rest of it, but it was mainly because of meeting people, like-minded people, especially people in America. You know, when they're atheists, they're segmented, they're off on their own, you know. So I find that we would come to the internet and come to YouTube and things like that to find like-minded people, you know, to find people that we think with. And to make a bad comparison from you to another Christian, people like Jewell and Smokey and things like that, they come to the internet for the exact same reasons, which is to find people who think alike and find like-minded people that they can communicate with. But that stance of Christianity and that version of Christianity is not what you meet in the real world. You know, it's fucking insane. Some of them, they're fucking mad.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so the reason I bring that up is to ask you is, you know, I don't think that you came to the internet to find crazy people like you because you're friends with Spartan, so you couldn't be that crazy. If you know, what was the drive to come to YouTube? What was the reason that you started your channel?
Yeah, good question. So I just kind of going a little bit further back for me, back to 2013 to 2016, I was doing my graduate studies at Duke, studying theology there. And coming out of there, I got the job at the church that I'm currently working at now. And I don't know, I started to kind of listen to some of the Christian YouTube stuff that you were alluding to. Mm-hmm. That's tends to be very dominated and sort of
it's okay, you can say assholes. You can say assholes.
I'm trying to be a bit careful with what I say. It's dominated by certain approaches to like Christian apologetics. And that's the stuff that gets the most views. That's the stuff that gets the most subscribers. Gets the most listens, right? And a lot of it is sort of dumping on atheism and sort of propping up one's own position using certain very specific sorts of philosophical arguments. And I wasn't trained in that. When you study theology in an academic setting at a place like Duke, you're not taught that stuff.
Yeah.
You're reading all sorts of different theology. You're reading all sorts of different Christian figures that stretch back through the centuries, and you get sort of a breadth of understanding of the way that Christianity has developed, and different sorts of thinkers where they disagree, where they contradict, all that sort of stuff. And so it gives you this sort of landscape of like, oh, there's a lot more cool stuff going on than just syllogisms that are supposed to lead you to God, right? And so that's sort of the background of where I'm coming from as someone who studied at Duke and then also did a bachelor's degree prior to that in philosophy and religious studies, which is, again, very different than the sort of popular level stuff that we see on YouTube. And so I kind of noticed a bit of a lacuna, I guess, in the YouTube space for introducing people to different approaches to theology that they may not have heard before, and different approaches to biblical studies that weren't sort of limited to apologetics or sort of very conservative evangelical approaches to the Bible. And I don't know, I have a base of knowledge that I can bring to that, and I decided to just kind of give it a go. And yeah.
No, well, I give you that. It's modest. It's honest. It's truthful. And at the same time, I'll twist it and I'll say that you're here for the same reasons as us, and that's to fight against the crazy Christians that's out there spreading bullshit.
Honestly, yeah, that is definitely a part of it. Is to both offer an alternative to that and also show ways in which they're kind of doing things wrong in a lot of different ways, theologically and philosophically, and in terms of the scholarship in the Bible that they deploy a lot of the time. So in some sense, I'm on the same page as a lot of the sort of atheist scholarship, right?
I find, a lot of them are ignorant. A lot of them are rude. A lot of them would have this, the stereotypical idea that you get anti-theists out there. They are that persona of it. They are that one that goes forth and screams and shouts and are prejudiced and against LGBTQ and things like that. There,
right? For sure.
They are that stereotypical sort of evil Christian, so to speak. But the atheists on my side would use as an example of this is the evils of Christianity.
Yeah. For sure. And I think you're using a very accurate word for that, because I think there are very clear expressions of Christianity that do horrible evils, not just in what they say about certain people, certain oppressed people, especially LGBTQIA people, but
you have no problem
of different races, and like I have no problem with agreeing with you on that. Agreeing with you on that. Like I think you're just totally right.
You see, and then it falls back down to something, and we'll lean back into the questioning again, but something that I would always say is anytime that I do have a conversation with a Christian, and maybe not someone as well educated as yourself, someone like it would be a mainstream Christian, if I could say so, someone out on the street, someone that you just interact with, and you ask them what is being a Christian, what would they consider being a Christian, and it usually comes down to morality. We're not going to get into where it comes from, but it's a lot of times I would say the humanist points of view. What people would consider to be a Christian can be boiled down to humanist plus community.
Right, humanist plus a certain account of confessing, Jesus. That's kind of a pretty big difference between certain, Christian approaches. But we're on the same team in terms of how this practically works out, right? So I've been involved in various sort of community organizing stuff, and especially to do with prisons and prison justice and that sort of world, where a lot of the people involved in that are not Christians. They're people of all different sorts of walks of life, but when you come together for a certain common cause, like our prison system is completely fucked up and we need to like respond to that, right? All that stuff matters. Like the truth claims that I'm coming with and the truth claims that other people come with, they matter. But when we're actually doing the real work on the ground, that's really what matters in those contexts, right?
Yeah, so we're both coming at it from with the same sort of goal, I would say. You know, we're not going to say I'm going to try and convert and you're trying to convert or anything like that, but the goal to help people, the goal to be there, the goal to build a community. You know, we can tie together and we can agree on that. Where we disagree on then is all the other stuff, right? And were you an adult convert? Have you always been a Christian? Is it something that you know, you were raised in? Can we tap a wee bit into that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I would consider myself an adult convert. I sort of growing up, we would go to church occasionally, and my grandparents were like super Pentecostal Christians, and like when we would go on like during holidays like Christmas and Easter and all of that, we'd of course go to church. Or when we were visiting my grandparents on the weekend, we would go to church, and that was sort of the initial exposure that I got to Christianity, was sort of through that kind of specific tinge of Christianity in the United States. Yeah. And yeah, my so the grandparents that were super Pentecostal were my dad's parents. So my dad sort of grew up in that, and he was kind of, I mean, he still is very much a sort of agnostic, and he's studied philosophy. He's a historian by trade. And so he was sort of academic.
Yes, you've been around. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So I was around that kind of early on in his books, like his library, and like he had a lot of really cool stuff that I was able to kind of. That's one thing I can mention.
I appreciate your angle. The last time I watched your live stream, if your camera is what would be to my left, I was having a shit attack. I just wanted to come over and clean your room. There was that many books in the background.
It's even worse now. I don't want to turn because we've got some boxes on the ground, packing all of the books up and getting ready to
Sorry,
move.
I interrupted.
No, you're fine.
So yeah, your father and your grandparents. Yes, go on ahead.
Yeah. So we would go, visit their church and all that, and my dad sort of taking a different angle as he grew up. And then my mom was raised Catholic. My mom was Mexican. She grew up in a big Mexican family. She kind of left that specific Catholicism behind and grew up in evangelicalism a bit. And but like as far as my like daily life growing up, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a Christian upbringing. Like
culturally,
yeah, I knew about the Bible. I knew about sort of God, but it wasn't something that like growing up, I just wanted to like play baseball, play my guitar, you know, try and get a girlfriend. All that sort of stuff was just like all I did. Right, just kind of a normal kid. And then going into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I don't even know why I went to college, honestly, because I had no
thing to do in America, isn't it? Though.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this is the next thing you do when you graduate from high school. It's like, well, no, not really, but it was just sort of, you know, in the water. So I went to college and ended up taking a philosophy course, like an intro course, just because it fulfilled the requirement, right, for the curriculum. And I took it, and I just realized I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading certain philosophical thinkers. I enjoyed the way that they wrote, the way that they thought. And prior to that, like in high school and stuff, I was always a good writer. And so like when you get to a philosophy course, a lot of what you do is writing about different people, synthesizing different material, making arguments, all of that. So that kind of came naturally to me. And so I was like, this stuff's pretty cool. And I became good friends with the professor, my philosophy professor. And he was like, you should take this class on Christian theology. It seemed like you would be kind of suited for that. So
and at this stage when he's saying that to you, is he a Christian? You're still
no, he's an atheist. No, he was an atheist. Yeah, he's educated at just down the road from me at UNC Chapel Hill. So he's an atheist philosopher. But he was good friends with this other guy who was teaching in the religion department. And he was like, you should take a class with him. He's a good guy. And I think you get along and enjoy the material. So yeah, I went into this kind of intro to theology course, which of course overlaps with philosophy, because a lot of the early Christian theologians. We're also, I mean, they're trained philosophers. They're doing philosophy. The way that they argue is philosophical. And so I started reading kind of, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, Gregory of Nyssa, those sorts of folks. And again, I was like, this stuff's really cool. I like thinking about this stuff. I like kind of analyzing arguments. I like all of that stuff. And then kind of along the way, I formed a good relationship with that theology professor and started taking more classes in the religion department and maintained my interest in philosophy too. So sort of a parallel thing. I ended up double majoring. And along the way, sort of reading through the major figures in Christian theology, I have a hard time explaining like I have a hard time narrating like what happened, like what a conversion moment was, because I don't have that.
Yes.
I wasn't sort of smacked off my horse, right, like Paul was, or at least was depicted in Acts, right?
Yeah, well,
it
see,
wasn't this sort of dramatic experience.
That's great to hear, because one of the I named it, as I say, a question, a Christian, and one of the questions that I was gonna ask, I'll ask it now, like, is if you would have been an adult convert, give us your personal testimony that did it, because I find that a lot of people like that, whenever you're talking to Christians and things like that, it is a very personal thing. Obviously, Christianity.
Yeah.
Jesus wants to be your best friend and hang around me and play cool and all. So it's a personal thing. But I find an awful lot of it is personal testimony, which one personal testimony to another person with personal testimony can be very convincing, because they've both experienced it from a personal point, even though their experiences are different. But it carries weight. So you would then, in the other sense, you would be, I would say, convinced from a philosophical point of view that Jesus exists, that God exists.
Yeah, in some ways, but it also wasn't through, like, I didn't read a particular argument and thought, this is it. Now I believe in God. Now I think Jesus is the Lord. But it was more kind of being confronted with the way that these thinkers were talking, because there is a similarity in the way that they sort of grasp onto the biblical material, grasp onto different theological arguments and all of that. And eventually I just got to a place where I was starting to think that the stuff that they were actually talking about was true. And I can't sort of give you a specific moment, like an aha moment, really, or like an aha kind of argument that, but it was sort of a progression where I started to kind of slowly be like, this stuff's really interesting. I think the main thing for me with that was the idea of God becoming flesh in a person and being executed by the state. How weird that is. That's at the center of the Christian story. How just kind of bizarre that is. There was something, and I like weird things. I like bizarre sorts of kind of paradoxical kind of interior.
You see, I could fight back in that, and considering who he was and looking at the history sort of point aside, and obviously history's a probability game. There's nothing that we can confirm or anything like that. But Jesus is, we're not going to go down the mythicist route. A possibility, maybe an agglomeration of 2 or 3 people, because it was very popular at the time. But the idea now, from our point of view, that could have happened, could have been weird. Looking back at it, he taking out the divinity and taking out the actual leader of the Christian, whatever it was, he was a hell preacher. There was an awful lot of them around. Even his name wasn't that popular to a certain extent,
Right, well, he was definitely an apocalyptic prophet. That's what we know about him historically. And thanks for not going down the mythicist route.
I don't think, personally, I think that the stories, as time has went by, from my point of view, just to give you a small synopsis so you can get where the context of where I'm coming from is, say, for talk's sake, using the Gospels as an example, you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible, but you've got Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John in actual real time. And as you're looking through the Gospels, they get more and more exaggerated. So from my point of view, and what I've sort of landed on it is, and it's an amalgamation of different stories coming from different tribes, different sections, different sects of Christianity.
Definitely.
Could have been one guy, could have been 2 guys, could have been 3 guys. Doubtful it was no guy. But
right,
as time went along, the stories have become more exaggerated and amalgamated into one person, and that's my point of view.
For sure, and I actually I agree with that. I think that the witnesses of the Gospels, and of course they're not written by, Jesus' disciples. We know. I mean, I'm trained in, historical critical method. This stuff is just kind of, I take it for granted, honestly, a lot of the time. It wasn't so much the historical stuff for me. It was the sort of the theological kind of explanation of the incarnation and this whole, which is of course arising out of the text in different texts. But that sort of confronted me in this way that sort of began this process of being like, I'm starting to take this on board as true. And honestly, I think the main thing was forming relationships with people who were both, I mean, in the church. So I started getting involved in the church in my college town and forming relationships with them and seeing the ways that they were living and confessing and working for working for the good of people who had been forgotten by the powerful and the rich. And so so many different powerful sort of figures and institutions in our world, and that attracted me too, the sort of practical stuff as well, not just the heady stuff. It was the way that I saw these people working toward the good of all, and I got involved with that. And sort of, I think through those relationships that kind of began to solidify, if you want to call it a conversion. You can.
Well, like, to flip it around, if someone said to me, have you got a deep conversion moment, I'll tell you a story, and I can say
exactly.
People who watch the channel know they stood up the front of church and stuff like that and all, but it wasn't that. I went from doing that into anti-theism, and then I went from that into a wee bit of deism, and then after a time I went into being, me, and then I'm now atheist, agnostic, whatever the fuck it is. But there is a progression. It does take time,
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the relationships that you begin to form. Like it's mediated through people, whether that's a conversion or a deconversion or an adjustment in sort of worldview. A lot of it has to do with the people that you're interacting with. And we are people who are individuals who have, we think for ourselves in certain ways, but we are very much influenced by the people around us and kind of constituted and determined by them as well.
Social species that wants to be part of a group. We all do want to be part of a group. Nobody wants to be alone.
And we always already are before we realize it. We're always already connected to people by virtue of being human beings, right? We're not just isolated individuals sort of floating around, bumping up against each other. Yeah. I think a sort of social account of personhood is a big part of this, right? But yeah, that's kind of how I would narrate my way into Christianity. And then
the church that you go to, the label that they will put on it, what is it? Is it Baptist? Is it Presbyterian? Is it this or what is it?
So it was a Presbyterian church. It was a Presbyterian Church USA, which is the more sort of quote unquote liberal denomination.
Fucking Presbyterians are crazy over here.
Within the Presbyterian. Yeah, I was gonna say it's not like what you think, because I know about that.
Yeah, we've got Presbyterians, and then we've got Free Peas, which are free Presbyterians. They're even worse. It's like
yeah. So don't think that. Right. I don't know a good parallel, but it's very much sort of more inclusive sorts of Christians that are there, who are sensitive to all sorts of different people and where they're coming from. And so I was brought into that kind of context. I didn't go through like a fundamentalist or sort of conservative evangelical phase or anything like that.
No young earth creationism. No young earth creationism.
No, none of that stuff.
So you would consider, say, you would be maybe an old earth creationist then? Would you believe in evolution?
Yeah, I do believe in evolution.
Take your time.
I have a hard time aligning myself with certain approaches to old earth creationism that still really want to say that the Bible is giving us something scientific in some way about what's going on, because I just don't think that's what's going on in the Bible.
Right, okay, we're going to poke a wee bit. We'll poke a wee bit and go down that line, right? So, considering that you would be, I assume, believe in science. We're not a young Earth creationist. Evolution does exist. It's a fact. The world is a fucking round ball. It's not flat. We're gonna,
not flat.
We're going down that route. How do you see then the Bible? Do you see that as the immutable word of God written down for all of us to be seen and lead our lives by, or do you see that as a collection of stories written in a metaphorical sense, or there's the apocalyptic type of writing and there's the prophetic type of writing, and you see it then something from what our point of view would be then. So you find your Christianity is more based on how you feel and how you approach things from a philosophical point of view rather than what you would read in the Bible.
Right. Yeah. I would. Yeah. I very much agree with what you were saying as far as recognizing the diverse literature that we have in the throughout the Bible. And I'm not an inerrantist. I don't think the Bible is the immutable word of God. I don't
King
think.
James only. Yay.
I don't. Yeah, King James only. Right. I don't come at it that way. I think the way that I like to talk about the Bible is it gives us more of a kind of language to speak about the gospel and about Jesus and about God and about people, all that sort of stuff. There are analogies, there are narratives, there are stories, there are all sorts of different mythological dimensions to that.
Did Jonah be in the whale? Was Jonah in the whale?
No. No. These are stories that are meant to convey something theologically to particular people at a particular time, right? That doesn't mean we can't glean insights from them today. Really, we can do that with lots of different literature too.
Oh yeah. Read a book that was written in the 1800s can still have a profound effect on your life now, even though the story is different. What they're trying to convey, the feelings they're trying to convey, the actions, the way of thinking, transcends time, so to speak, transcends the scene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I like to think of the diverse kind of body of literature that we have stretching. I mean, it's some of the books in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, are so ancient. Yeah. They're just so old, and they make no sense to our modern, minds. And I think recognizing the kind of foreignness of this text, especially some of the most ancient stuff that we have, is really important to recognize initially, right? We need to come to grips with that. And even, of course, with the New Testament, too. It's still very, very old. It's written in a different language. It's written in a very specific kind of ancient language. Yeah. It's written in Koine Greek in the New Testament, right? And then we have Hebrew and, of course, some Aramaic in there as well. But it's old. But I think at the same time, for Christians, in the way that where I'm coming from as a Christian, we use this body of literature in the church, is almost like, I like to think of it like a botanical garden, where you can kind of walk into it and there are different hothouses in that garden. So you can open up like an old creaky door, right? And you can walk into like a Mexican desert. And you can observe the landscape. You see the flora, you see the fauna, you experience this different environment, right? But then you can leave that environment, walk into the next one. You're in an Amazonian rainforest. You're in all these different kind of areas. And it gives us these beautiful stories. Sometimes horrific stories.
I was going to say they're not all fucking beautiful. At least you acknowledge that.
Sometimes very beautiful and helpful stories that we encounter and environments that we encounter. And as Christians, I would hope the way that we're using the text is trying to step in and find the things that are applicable for us today in the way that we live our lives, in the way that we interact with one another, in the way that we love our neighbors, and the way that we love people. If it's not doing that, if it's not getting us to a place where we are loving other people, there's either something in the text, which there sometimes is, that we don't need to use, that we can say, this is not something
that's applicable to this time and age.
Yes.
So you would be at you can see the differences in this applied to that cultural time and this applied to this cultural time.
And I think the way that we do that is through communally discerning how we're actually interpreting these texts, right? So it's not just one preacher standing up there saying, this is how you need to read this text. I think in a lot of the churches that I've been a part of, it's through communally reading these texts together and learning together and praying together and all of that sort of stuff that goes on. And that's the kind of means through which we can apply these texts. It's much more complicated and interesting to me than saying God wrote this book, right? That settles it. We directly apply everything that's said propositionally to today, and then we do that.
I'm going to channel one of the live viewers at the minute, right? And Ox, if I get this wrong, please feel free to type in the chat. I'm going to try and be Ox for, and sort of channel Ox for a wee minute here, right? And say some of the things that I've seen Ox say and come at it from that point of view. The reason I say this, Ox, is because of the Twitter post that I noticed earlier that you put out. And the statement boils down to Christianity was created to control the masses of the, that's what it is. It's about control, right? And you're looking at Christianity now 2,000 years later, after it's had 60, 70 sects at the start. They've had the Council of Nicaea, they've decided what's in the Bible, they've decided this, they've had the atrocities. There has been thousands and hundreds of thousands of people killed in his name. You've had the Crusades, you've had all that now. Yes. That has enforced Christianity across the world as a method of control, so to speak, to control the masses. And now that you have that freedom and that sort of control over the community and in culture, especially in America, the universities were set up by the Christian faith because they were the only fuckers that had money at the start. That's the reason. It's not because they wanted and they were doing this for the health and benefit of everybody. It's because they were the only ones who could. But you see where I'm coming from is Christianity now that and I say that your upbringing, so to speak, in the Christian faith, I feel has been very lucky. You haven't had to touch that side of the craziness, and you've been, as you say, in a very communal sort of area.
It's lucky in a certain sense, but it's also not, because I have trouble figuring out how to engage with some of the folks who came up in more fundamentalist kind of conservative evangelical approaches, because I just didn't experience that. And it's just, I don't know, I struggled to kind of make contact with that constituency of people. And I think people who have moved, who grew up in that and moved away from that, have an easier time engaging and like conversing with those people.
Matching.
Yeah. And I have a much easier time, I think, engaging with
the point I'm trying to make, though, is the Christianity that you have experienced, right? Lucky or not lucky, that form of Christianity now, which we will call good Christianity, because you're not these fucking crazy people, and you're doing some community work, And again, I'm gonna Spartans vouch for you. So he says you're good, and you have to sort of steal a word. You have that privilege now. Christianity can do that now because of all the atrocities that's happened. People shout at Islam because it does these awful things. Islam is 600 years younger than Christianity. Look back 600 years in Christianity. What were they doing then? I'm trying to find the words I'm looking for here.
I think I see what you're getting at.
The belief in the book, right? You're sitting down, you're going through these books, right? You're happy to say, right, I'm just going to try and steel man you in a paraphrasey way. We'll scrap the Old Testament because it's full of really old stuff that doesn't matter. We'll pick and choose from the New Testament what does apply to this culture and in this time, and what we can take from it to help make our lives better. And from that picking and choosing, you're only taking the good parts out of it. Christianity as a whole, over the long 2,000 years of a time, has been more fundamental, has been more orthodox, has been more literal, and has taken them things that are in the Bible and, used it all. The Christianity you're coming across now, and the Christianity you're putting across to me now, again, sorry for the lack of words, and I just sound like an asshole, I'm not really one, is it's very easy to be a Christian that you're trying to be now, because you're just picking what you want from the Bible. Do you understand?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I may have misled you slightly in the way that I was talking about it, because I do think that there are certain stories and there's certain language in the Old Testament that we do use. I mean, it is the book of the New Testament.
I was paraphrasing.
Divorce that. What I would say is, I don't think that my approach is actually very recent. I think the sort of approach where you're gleaning sort of metaphorical and sort of analogical and sort of non-literal insight is actually very old. This is what the earliest fathers were doing. Origen, for example, Gregory of Nyssa, for example. They were deploying a very different reading of the scriptures than the fundamentalists and sort of literalists, which I think is actually the modern approach. Fundamentalism didn't actually really rise into prominence.
Well, using the word fundamentalism, you know, may be a modern term, but the Crusades, you know, that's you know, they were very staunch in their opinion, and
I don't know how much of that was rooted in a kind
maybe
of
not the word to use would be fundamentalist, but you get the point I'm using by making that word. Words are just descriptors; they're not labels. You know, they're just descriptors. You understand them?
Yeah. I got you. I think I'm drawing on a sort of earlier approach in terms of allegory. Like, I do think there's a way to sort of bring these things through allegorically, and we have certain figures in the church who are doing that as well. And as far as picking and choosing, but we all do that. The question is, what methodology are we using to interpret
I don't
the scriptures,
think,
right?
I know that we all do pick and choose, but if I could say that I would lead my life as a logical, critical thinker, then I don't have a choice of picking and choosing. I follow that scientific method. I follow that trail of thought. I follow, you know, logic to a point, and I don't have a choice to pick and choose. You know, facts are facts whether I believe in them or not. The evidence is there whether I believe in it or not. If you have 20 tales and 10 of them talk about murdering babies and 10 of them talking about helping community, you know, back in the olden days, they would have used the 10 killing babies to justify having a war with the person next door. And they also would have had to try and be friends and family with the people who are in their tribe. Nowadays, we scrap the war and we scrap the killing people, but we still want to be friends with this, that, and the other. You know, so it's dropping of the old to continue on with the new. As everything progresses through time, it has to change. But but you see, yes with that, right? But Christianity is Christianity, and God and Jesus supposedly have been around for this length of time, and they are who they are. They don't change over time. They are immutable, you know, so to speak. So it's the idea that Christianity can progress, from my point of view, is watching it become more progressive and hopefully over time fade itself out. This is steps towards the end. We see the numbers going down. We see less people going, more people becoming more progressive and left and leaning that direction rather than the conservative sort of that direction. Don't get me wrong, their numbers specifically are going up, but overall, the church is going down. And I really do appreciate your approach to Christianity, especially with the scholarly research coming forth with that. This is my point of view. This is why I believe it, and here's my evidence why. It's not just screaming and shouting, but it's again, it falls back in the yous have been evil, so to speak. Yous have done all the atrocities. Yous have done all that, and now you have the privilege and the nice and the choice to pick and choose what you want. But if Christianity is Christianity, it should always be the same. You know.
But let me step back, and I think it would be helpful to talk about Christianity as a sociological phenomenon as well, just like any other sociological phenomenon that has occurred in the history of of our, in the West and also in the East and all of that. It is a specific phenomenon that does, it is going to change, as all sociological phenomenons change. That Christianity has adjusted and changed throughout history. I don't think it follows from that God does or Jesus does. Or anything like that. I think what's changing is the way that we're sort of understanding that and deepening into that. But at the same time, I want to be very clear. Christianity has been involved with some of the most horrific things in the history of humanity. I totally agree with that. I think I think an argument would need to be made, though, that this is grounded in some sort of pure static account of Christianity.
Oh no. Well, I wouldn't. Yeah. I would agree with you that Christianity has changed over time. Yeah. And it has changed for both the better and the worse, depending on the era, depending on the time, depending who's in charge. You know, depending on what Christianity's in charge, depending what king is in charge at the time, these things can change.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I guess I'm not quite sure.
Sometimes hard for me to articulate my question.
No, you're fine. I get the whole. So if I could kind of summarize where I'm hearing. No. So you have this Christianity is involved in all this horrible stuff throughout history, and now at this point, now that we're sort of on the other side of the Crusades, we're on the other side of even the Holocaust, which was perpetrated by the Christians. Principally, it wasn't this sort of secular state. It was Christian.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anyone who needs to hear that on the live stream, but now that we're on the other side of that, we have a kind of privileged position, as you were saying, to kind of continue on and do something
you
different.
You don't have to fight now because.
Right. I would just agree with that, and I think you're probably right about the church. Don't tell too many churches that I said this. I think the church is gonna die.
Yeah,
I think it's gonna die. Not just
the numbers just shut up. The Christians said the church is dying.
Yeah.
The numbers are going up.
Yeah, right. Not just liberal Protestantism, which is in a massive decline. My denominations that I've been a part of are dying rapidly, right? And the only growth that we see, at least in the United States, is among the conservative evangelicals. Yeah. That's still growing and networking in a certain way. But yeah, the Christianity that I've been a part of is dying, and the real task I think of Christians who are sort of in a similar position to me in these sort of more mainline denominations is what are we going to do if the institutions are beginning to sort of fracture and fall apart, and we still want to remain Christian? What is that going to look like? And I think it can exist in some way without sort of institutional structures in place.
Yeah.
It may mean that people who are involved in the church, or especially clergy who are involved in the church, people who are sort of leaders, don't get paid because they don't have institutional backing to give them money.
I don't feel
right?
bad about that at all.
Yeah. But like, I don't know. I think there potentially could be ways sort of beyond institutional kind of safeguards that Christianity still could exist in some way, even if it means meeting in like a bar and like hanging out and like
I refer to my mother who I think she's maybe fallen asleep. She usually does be at the streams. Poor granny's usually here. I don't know if you're watching, Mum, or not, but I would refer to her as a spiritual Christian, because at the very head, so to speak, at the very top, there is God and there's Christ and there's her upbringing, and you know, the Bible and going to church and things like that will always be part of her. And I've had this conversation with her as I'm having with you now, and from my point of view, it boils down to she's afraid of hell. But she'll shout at me later. She always does when I say that. But you know, she doesn't go to church. You know, she. I don't even think there's a fucking Bible in my mum's house. And there's about 6 here. I've got one right beside. I've got the Gideon Bible. I think, I've got the Gideon Bible right beside me here. You know,
nice.
My mum, if you have this conversation with her, talk with her, she would still refer to herself as a Christian. She still has her beliefs. She still has, you know, what she has at her core. So using that as an example, I can see it moving forward. But it is generally dying as an institution, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think that's the way we're headed. And I'm not, I don't think I told you this before the stream when we were chatting about kind of stuff going on with moving and all of that. I'm not continuing on in church employment as I go. I'm looking for different work. Yeah. I'm kind of transitioning away from working in church settings. It partly to do with that reality. Like I want to still be able to make, money in some way and like be employed.
Nice to have that roof above your head.
And like,
you like that nice new bass beside you,
Yeah, that's right. I want to be able to keep that and not sell it on
the gentle stroke.
But,
I love you.
But yeah, I understand the reality of what's going on, and that's like practically kind of informing the way that I'm making decisions, about myself and sort of future stuff as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And you mentioned institutions like with colleges and universities, right? And how Christians were sort of the ones who were setting that up early on, and because they had the money.
Yeah.
A lot of them are still very much affiliated with a certain denomination. So Duke, for example, is a Methodist institution, right? And it has a Methodist seminary. And you have this in various, like with Princeton, you have Princeton and the Princeton Seminary, which is a Presbyterian seminary, right? I will be curious to see what happens in the next 15, 20 years, whether or not seminaries will even exist anymore. I just don't know. Mainline Christian seminaries, I don't know. I just don't know. But at the same time, I'm not super
seminary may not exist, but I would say the philosophical side of it will always exist.
Yeah.
And I don't think that God as an actual thing will disappear. I think it still will be studied. I still think that people will, look into it and things like that. Because at the end of the day, I've said this before, the biggest questions in life always boil down to religion and politics and things like that. It's whether the church exists or not. Like, yourself, you're here, you're on an atheist channel, agnostic channel, whatever. But I do this because I still have these questions. I lead my life as if God doesn't exist. Because I see no physical evidence and I see no, I've had experiences, don't get me wrong, and I've still things that I have yet to explain, but that's how I look upon them as, it is something unanswered yet. I don't want to use the fallacy of God of the gaps. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Leaning on that then, what is the goal? What are you aiming for with the Christianity, so to speak? Like, you obviously believe in heaven and hell then, would you?
I believe in a certain kind of... okay, let me preface this. I'm a universalist of a certain kind. I believe that all things will be reconciled to God in Jesus Christ. Everything will be drawn back to God and restored and healed. And that I'm pretty unashamed about that. That's an approach that I take, and I think it's an approach that I've learned from various different Christian theologians throughout church history. Of course, the dominant approach throughout most of the church has been there is a heaven for the faithful, and there is a hell of some kind of torment for non-believers, right? So that's been the dominant sort of approach. But again, you have, especially early on with the early church fathers, there were a lot of universalists running around back then. Mm-hmm. A lot of them. Saint Basil the Great writes about how, in his part of the ecumeny, there were a lot of universalists. They were pretty dominant in certain Eastern sections of the church early on. But what you get with the development of Christianity, and I think the attachment of Christianity to power, is you get this desire to have an other, right? That you can sort of dump on, right? Yes, and I think that ends up solidifying what we now know as, doctrines of hell, and heaven in this sort of binary. That's not to say that there aren't certain verses and passages in the Bible that speak about some kind of I don't know about the eternal conscious torment stuff, but there are certain passages that talk about some kind of destruction, right? But there are also these wonderful universalist passages as well that talk about all things.
Well, to lean on that, I'm gonna be an asshole. We're gonna poke at the bad stuff here and find out the reasons why.
No, yeah.
Leaning on that sort of side, do you think there's a, like, I had this conversation with, as you know, making that reference point again to a mainstream Christian, someone who doesn't believe in evolution. This guy is 55. I work with this guy in the machine right next to me. Doesn't believe in evolution, believes in faith healing. You know, I think he's a young earth creationist, but he doesn't realize he is, because it's not 6,000 years old, but God did create everything, but it's not as old as what it is because evolution doesn't exist. So he's sort of a medium age. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we were having this conversation, and I said I was looking forward to the interview I had on Monday, because the guy that came on was a PhD student in theoretical cosmology and with a love of philosophy. And that's just bang up my alley. That's shit I'm into. I says, them two subjects and human evolution are three things that I'm enjoyed in. He mentioned about the no evolution, so we started the conversation. And to put the question to you that I'll explain, I put to him is, my wee girl told her to put the lid on the juice, didn't want to get out her side of the car, wanted to climb over the car and get out daddy's door, didn't put the lid on tight, spilt juice on the fucking car, spilt it on the car seat, car's only got a week. You know, I specifically told her not to do it, and she did it anyway. You know, and I asked him, what did you expect me to do? Should I then punish my daughter? Should I have then this, that, and the other? And he was like, no, she's only 4. She doesn't know any better. And I was like, right. And he had spouted about Adam and Eve quite earlier in the week. And I was like, so you have Adam and Eve in a garden. And they went and had a fucking piece of fruit. And now everybody for the rest of time has to know. And he was like, yes, but that's different. And I was like, how's it different? Because God created them. And I was like, well, I created my daughter.
Right.
You know,
you're hitting on something important. But yeah, go ahead.
No, well, that's basic the story. So that's the question I put forth to you. He agreed that if it had happened to him, would not punish his child, where it's okay for God. And I used the ATHEIST phrase, so you're more moral than your God.
Yes.
And it all boiled down to that God was allowed to, and everything that we went down that route on. It's on Twitter. I put the whole conversation on Twitter. The amount of contradictions and just compartmentalization in his brain in one fucking paragraph, just to justify and to lean, you know, God is first and I justify after. Where from an atheist and a skeptic's point of view, we would be justifying the answer, you know, or we would be trying to find the evidence for the answer, so to speak, the opposite. And, you know, I put that question to you. Are you more moral than your God?
Am I more moral than my God? No, but I think in all of our, and I would say whether or not we acknowledge it, I think all of our, the ways in which we act and think and behave morally is grounded in a good, and I would call that good, God. I'm not saying that I can give a persuasive argument for the existence of that God or that good. It's a confessional claim.
There you go. I win. No, that's what I said at the start. There'll be a personal testimony that he can't explain. I win. Yay.
It's a confessional claim. It is, and I don't think we can do much better than that. But what I would say is, what you hit on something really important with the family and like parental kind of situation with God, and this applies very much to discussions about hell and punishment as well.
He went down the free will route, and I just walked away. I was not going to.
Right, but like, so if we think that God, as I confess, is love, and reveals that love in Jesus Christ, and that's sort of the basis of who God is, and you have people who are resisting that and rejecting that for all sorts of reasons.
I'll disagree with your choice of words. I get your point you're trying to make. Go on ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that everybody knows God and therefore they consciously reject God.
Yes, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I'm not meaning that. I just mean that.
I'm just being pedantic on your words for fun.
No. It's an important thing, because that's actually a danger that I see people falling into, especially apologists when they appeal to something like Romans 1 and they're like, oh, God is plain to everybody, everyone knows, you're without excuse.
Did you see the trees?
Yeah, that whole. Yeah, did you look outside at the fucking birds or whatever? There's God. You know, I think that argument's not good. But what I mean is, if we think that God is love all the way down, which is what I could confess, and people make a mistake, and you used Adam and Eve as an example, which I think is a good one, but also even beyond that, coming from my point of view as a Christian, when I don't know, do something dishonest and like deceive somebody and hurt somebody else, right?
Pardon?
Which is, I think, if I were to harm somebody else from some action that I did, right? Or even if your daughter harmed somebody else, and like it could have come from a place of intention or a place of all sorts of other factors as well.
Yeah.
There may be some kind of harsh words and some kind of a punishment there, but it's all for the purpose of restoring a relationship. You don't disown your daughter.
My wee girl was a biter for a wee stage. She went through a stage where if you were messing around and you would tickle her too much, she would bite you, you know. And there was an incident at school where other kids were biting people and things like that there and stuff like that. You know, she now has grown out of it, but, you know, she's a child. She's unaware of that. And don't get me wrong. She would have bit me, and in the instant I would have raised my voice. 2 weeks ago, I raised my voice that much that she cried, because when she came into the kitchen, she was pulling on a towel, and on the top of the towel on the bench was a plate. And I told her to be careful, and she pulled it, and with her bare feet, the plate then came down and broke into a million pieces all round her bare feet. And in the instant, I did raise my voice, and she stood there and she cried. But I didn't beat the child. I didn't send her to internal... It was more of a reactional thing as a protective nature for the daughter, you know. So there is discipline there. Listen to daddy when daddy is talking. But there's not an eternal punishment, if you understand what I mean.
And it's not an eternal infraction. When your daughter does that, it's not something that has eternal consequences in and of itself as an action. So why would the response to that be some kind of eternal...
Yes, the response is relative to the action.
There needs to be some kind of proportionality there.
Yeah,
right?
and I, you know, I went with the whole atheist fucking phrases again, you know, just to get an attention out of this guy. And he said that evolution is the devil's trick. So I laughed and I said, sure, the devil's the good guy. And he goes, how the fuck did you figure that? Well, and I goes, well, you know, anybody who teaches, I then turned to him and I was like, did you teach your children the difference between good and evil? And he goes, of course I did. He's a good Christian. He taught his children the difference between good and evil. So is that not what the devil did? He went and taught, you know, they ate the fruit. They now know the difference between good and evil. I was like, the devil did the same job as you will actively do with your kids. And yeah, he didn't like that. Yeah,
I'm sure he didn't. That said, just to add to what you said, I think that for a lot of Christians who depict God as this sort of being that is really a God of retributive justice, right? We make a mistake, God responds with punishment, ultimately eternal punishment for people who do something wrong, right?
Yeah.
Who make a misstep, right? Or don't believe in Jesus or whatever. They end up being punished forever in hell on that model. And I think there's something to asking somebody who buys into that kind of approach. Another way, I guess how I'd put this is, it seems like there's an arbitrary choice between worshiping that sort of God and worshiping Satan. Because they, within that system, right? Within that, it's that specific system. It seems like a rather arbitrary choice, because you have this God who's really only going to save a select few, and then everyone else is just
and if
screwed.
you go down the Calvinist route, you know,
that's exactly. Yeah, it's even more sinister. It's even more sinister.
Yeah, you know, that's an extreme.
You get God choosing people specifically to damn them. God elects these people and creates them to be damned.
Yeah.
Right? How demented is that? Like, it's horrifying.
You see, you know, not as to go as far as demented and horrifying, but to bring it back a wee bit. No, not from the Calvinist point of view, but to bring it back down to your sort of version of Christianity, right? So it's not as, you know, evil and tormented as Calvinism, you know. But still, it's, you know, if there's an eternal life afterwards, right? First and foremost, I think anything after about 1,000 years would be insane, and anything after 5, with your memory being fucking wiped every now and again, would just be, you're like, immortality is just insane. it takes away the joy of life, the things that we enjoy. Like why did you buy that base? You bought that base because it's not a mass-produced base. It's not...
Because I wanted to rock.
It's... Well, yeah, that... But that particular one, I probably bet you that if you really wanted to, you could find a guitar that is producing the same frequencies mass-produced now, but doesn't look like this, doesn't feel like this, doesn't have that, whatever the fuck it is. You bought it because it's one of a kind and it lasts for a certain amount of time. There's a few of them. They were mass-produced at a time. They're now, so there's less of them. You know, the things that we find joy in, we find joy in them because they're limited. We find joy in them because they end, so to speak. I know that's maybe not the best way to look at it, but, you know, this life that we have, this 80 years that we have, if we're lucky, this 100 years, I'm going for 117. That's what I'm aiming for. Medical science allows. That's my magic number.
You got it.
We have this limited time in this earth.
Yeah.
And you do the things that you do with the community. You help and you do your prison outreach. And you do that to help these people. And as you said with the prison and stuff like that, they're not Christians. You're not there to convert them. You're there to help your fellow human being for this life that we have here. And I feel that having heaven and Christianity sort of shifts the burden. It takes away from the benefits of this life. It takes away from the joy that we can get here. And leading back again to the question I asked earlier is, what is the goal? What is the point? You know, I feel that you're some of these person, not that you want to convert, but you want to put your point across with evidence and let it see how it goes. People want to change their mind, they do. You're not trying to force it upon them. You're putting the evidence there. But what is the, you know, if conversion isn't the goal, what is the goal? Like, do you just want to make sure you don't end up in fucking hell? Do you want to go to heaven and live forever? You know, have you got 20 virgins waiting for you? Is that you know, it's...
right? No, I take your point, and it's a good question, and it's an important one. Like, what is the point of all this? Like, especially if I'm a universalist, and I think that everyone is, you know, getting in, and in my system being drawn back to the origin of their being, which is God, being drawn back into the life of God. I would just say that that's the telos in the end, and the purpose of all of this is, for me, and the way that I live, and the way that I speak to people, and the way that I interact with them, is to witness to what I think is a loving communion of people that I call God. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Whatever. I don't want to gender that too aggressively, but like that communion.
God's a woman. Did you not know?
God's a woman. Yeah. This communion of persons that I think we're being lovingly drawn into. If I can witness to that in the way that I relate to people, I'm hoping that I can, without necessarily saying it, because I mean, I think words are necessary sometimes, but in the way that I live, I hope that it's witnessing to that I actually care about this God, and that I actually think that this God is real and impacting my life, and that I'm witnessing to the fact that I think this is where we're all heading. This is where we're all going in the end. And that's for me, that's the purpose. And of course I like, if people decide and are encountered by something, and are encountered through relationships, whether that's through me or through other people, and they realize, you know, hey, I think this stuff is true, just like I did, you know, 15 years ago. Great, awesome. I'm glad. That's wonderful if that happens. But I'm not going out here, you know, saying that you need to convert to these specific propositions, and otherwise you're going to hell. I'm saying this is what I think is true, and this is where I think the cosmos in general is heading, right? And like, I hope that I can live and witness to that in a way that draws people in. And I'm not gonna persuade somebody through an argument, because I don't think that's my job. And I wish that more people didn't think it was their job, because too many people think it's their job to to hammer people over the head with
We call them
certain
Bible
sorts of
thumpers.
arguments, but- Yeah, right.
Yeah. Free Presbyterians, Bible thumpers.
Yeah.
Over the fucking head.
Yeah. Right. On the point about eternal life, sort of the way that you characterized it was that is if it was like sort of a sequence of years and years and years. I think the way that
is it a
I
Jeremy
understand
Burman?
it. Yeah, the way that I understand it is it's going to be it, and of course we don't have very much. I mean, we're not there, so like we can't sort of say sort of what it's actually going to be like. But I think the way that a lot of Christian theologians talk about it is it's not timeless, and it's not sort of a never-ending sequence of time.
Yeah, it's a
It
Jeremy
is
Burman.
some other sort of space. Yeah, right. It's some other space, or even I mean, dimensional thinking is also a way to kind of get at this too.
Have you seen
Right.
The Good Life?
I have.
Oh, The Good Place.
Yeah.
Sorry, The Good Place.
Yeah, The Good Place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very good. I thought it was good sketch, but yeah, no, I get your point, right? And to make a reference to something that B said in the live chat as well, is something I was going to make a reference point to as well. I find from what I'm getting from you, excuse me, I do have a wee bit of a cold.
Oh, you're fine.
What I'm getting from you is you're a decent person. You have been lucky enough to have experienced, and through your education as well, you know, and when people are in college and they're leaning down this route and that route and stuff like that, you've had an enjoyment for philosophy, and we are malleable very so much in college. We're at that stage, you know. You've been into this community, and I think our end goals are the same, you know. I made a joke earlier that Dave said when I first put out the video for the new intro tonight. He was like, "You're not Jesus, fuck's sake, with the epic music and all." I got a copyright strike. There is, if anyone, the Patreons and the members, if you're a Patreon or a member, you can see the copyright striked one. It's very epic. But Dave said to me, it's very messianic. You know, it's very godlike and things like that. And I'm not going to make a joke that the pigsty is a church, but we're aiming for the same thing. I'm trying to bring people together, to help people as a community, to give people the opportunity to be safe, to have somewhere that they can come and go. Yeah. Somewhere where they can make friends and people of like-minded, for the betterment of everybody. Not just for the betterment of ourselves, because, you know, as individuals we're all shit. We're better together.
Absolutely.
We're better as a community, you know. And I feel that the form of Christianity 100%. That you're putting forward is just humanism with a fucking label. That's you're stuck in the old ways, man. Throw that label away. We've agreed the church is down. We've agreed the church is down. Take that step.
It's humanism with a particular confession about who Jesus is involved in it. Yeah. And I admitted to that. I'm confessing it. I'm not saying that. Yeah. But that's really the only difference. And of course, the way that works out practically is going to look very similar, because I think that, you know, here's what I'll say. In my experience organizing and being involved sort of on the ground in communities, working for, as you said, the betterment of people, and the betterment of not just individual like myself and my own kind of enjoyment of life, even though I did get that base, but a lot of the atheists and agnostics that I've been around, and I would use you as an example in our brief conversation today, is I see y'all doing a better job at witnessing to the gospel that I think is true than a lot of Christians that I am around.
You know, I follow, man. I honest to God, that's been said to me a load of times. I used to have this argument with a guy at work, and he was like, "You need to come to our side. You're a better Christian."
No, than some people that's not what I'm saying. I want to come and like be in relationships with people like you, and people who are actually care about, you know,
other people,
human beings and other people, and that matters. That really matters a lot. And
if you can help, you should help. It's you know, it's just something I believe in. It's just something that you know, I try my best. I have my faults, you know. I know I'm not the greatest person out there, and but we try. I try. We try as a community, you know. And at the end of the day, I'm just the face of this channel. This, you know, sometimes I have to. Like, we have coming on tonight, and there's only me, because I refer to this channel as a community. I refer to it as, you know, the people in the live chat are here watching. They know the effort that they've put in. Dave, Amanda, and a few others who have put in an awful lot of effort to helping this, and they've been there for me. It is, it's not me, it's all of us. I know that's fucking cliche, but
for sure. No, there's a real truth to that though, and it's that's why it's a cliche. I mean, it's it is getting at something very important about the sort of efforts that people like you and your this channel that you're talking about, as we are doing and trying to bring forward. And I think that's great. I think it's I think it's awesome. I enjoy doing this stuff more than arguing about what, you know.
Well, the argument's still yet to come, because you did agree to 2 hours, and we've only been going 72 minutes. I'm going to open it up and let people come in now. We did agree.
Sure. Can I take a wee bathroom break and then I'll
no, I'm going to swap over. I'm going to swap over, and we'll do an after party. It's easier in my editing. So hang about for 2 minutes. We'll round up, and then we'll swap over and do an after party.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Yeah. So I really thank you very much, John, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
This has been a great conversation, and as I said, there's the after party going to come. We'll be going for that, and I'll put the link in the chat, and before I leave, and then other people can jump in. But yeah, no, really, I do like this, you know, and it's the reason why I always reach out to Spartan and try and get Spartan on to the open mic nights and things like that there, because I appreciate having a Christian opinion. You know, you can't have an echo chamber. I don't like echo chambers. I prefer to surround myself with people who disagree with me, because it makes conversations more interesting. You know? And sure. You won't learn, you won't find your limits, and you won't find out what you truly understand and what you truly believe unless somebody comes and tells you you're fucking wrong. You know, if everybody comes around and reinforces everything you say, you will grow up believing that you are the fucking Prince of Persia and everybody worships you and whatever the fuck, you know, you can grow up believing anything. But it's,
sure.
I appreciate you, John. And if you're Thursday nights this time now, I know for a fact that you're free because you've turned up. So we're hoping to bring the open mic nights back and trying to get a new crowd in. And
sounds great.
Definitely, we have different topics and talk about different things. And it is the umbrella term that most of my audience is under, is atheist, agnostic, non-believers, if so to speak. But we do discuss these things, and we can't turn around and always say all these Christians are bad and use examples like Smokey and Jill and all these other people and fucking asshole 104. My goodness, people like that. You know, it's nice to meet a fellow humanist with a label.
Yeah. Of course, and I do consider myself a fellow humanist. So yeah, it was great to meet you for the first time. We've of course chatted online a little bit before, but yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah, right. Really fun. So little pee break. I will copy the clipboard. The invite I will pop in. Dave, you've got preference, and Sammy, you've got preference, and Brian, you've got preference because you're Patreons. Also Dog as well. The Patreons get preference. Other than that, the link is in the chat. We will be back in 5-10 minutes, and I haven't scheduled the live stream yet, so just look out for it. It'll be popping up in a minute. So other than that, thank you everybody for coming by. Thank you, John, again, for coming. Patreons, members, and everybody that contributes. A lot of love for the live chat. And on that, everybody, think for yourselves. We'll see you back in a couple of minutes. Bye.